Friends, Dave Paulides, KM Missing Project. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Hope everyone had a good Christmas day. Huck had a brilliant day hanging out with her friends, running around like a crazy girl. Met a bunch of new doggy friends this Christmas, so she was really, really happy. And American Sasquatch, man, myth, or legend is doing quite well. And you can rent, it's now available for rent on almost all major platforms. But preferably you go to Amazon, you go there, watch it, leave a review. Reviews are really important to us. So please do that. Now, in the past I've talked to you about Nexus magazine. And I think it's one of the best magazines in the world. There's an article in here about Dr. Ken Johnston. He worked for NASA for a number of years. And before I read you what he has to say, I think it's important to understand his biography. 23 years at NASA, working with numerous space programs as well as the astronauts who manned those missions. He learned to fly in the U.S. Marines, and in the 60s was one of the original pilots who tested all the Apollo equipment, including the lunar module, and later carried Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. He's familiar with the processes of checks and balances used within NASA to secure the safety of a mission. First a test conductor, Johnson became the test director of the TM-5 lunar module training vehicle that was used to train all the lunar mission astronauts. In '69, he was responsible for controlling all the data and photographic information generated from the lunar missions. His academic qualifications include science degrees in aviation and aerospace engineering, a master's in theology, and a PhD in metaphysics. He became a NASA Solar System ambassador in 2004. Now, I read you that because I want you to understand that this guy is no slouch, and he was one of the top people in NASA that reviewed all of the photographs coming in from space, lunar issues. Now, in 2017, he gave an interview. And this is part of the interview. In essence, he was asked, do you believe that aliens exist? And he goes, absolutely. Cites a bunch of different examples. How did you develop your interest in aliens and space? Back in those days, I would watch the Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon TV series, he said. My father was a pilot, and I wanted to be one too, he said. And when you went to train, and then it says, and then you went on to train Neil Armstrong. He said, not just Neil, we were a team of 4, and our job was to test lunar mission module in the vacuum chambers to ensure that the systems were safe to be taken to space. In that process, Neil, Buzz, and Michael landed on the moon. Then they asked him if they thought the lunar mission was faked. He said no. He said once a reporter asked Buzz Aldrin if it was faked, and he got punched in the face. And then, how did you manage to get first-hand information on extraterrestrials? The reporter asked. He says, once we were done with the first 3 missions, I was put in charge of photography and documenting their exact location where these lunar missions took their pictures. One day, my boss ordered me to destroy these images. I reminded him that the government had paid for them and that they should be made public. To which he replied, no, get rid of them. I don't care what you think. Reporter asked, but why? Johnson says, because there were elements in the pictures that were unexplainable. You can now download them for free from my website. You can see the lunar anomalies too. It looks like something had been smudged out. Way before Photoshop, they would paint things out. Once when I walked into the photo lab, I saw a young woman painting something. She called herself a stripper and said that she was paid for it. This really upset me as I was in charge of keeping a record of things. I guess that's why they call me a whistleblower. They asked him, how transparent is NASA? He said, people like me who have gotten into trouble with NASA have a different expansion for the acronym. Then there was a segment where he was interviewed on Coast to Coast. And he said, I was in numerous decisions with NASA. One of them was at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. I was in charge of all the film that came back to get it processed and then show it to the engineers and scientists that were involved. I was firsthand present during looking at some of the anomalies on the lunar surface that we couldn't explain. I've explained those to Richard Hoagland before, and there were many things that I have shown up since then. Some of the conversations I had with certain people that always left me with the question, what were they holding back? A perfect example was when we were looking at the films of Apollo 14 on the backside of the moon. I can't recall the name of, but as the craft is coming over the shadow portion of the crater, there were like 5 glowing lights and a column that appeared like a plume of steam. Something coming straight up in a vacuum. I was asked to stop the film and take a look at it, and Dr. Thorne Page, who was the director of astronomy department and astrogeology, he said to the other scientists, quote, "Well, boys, what do you think of that?" End of quotes. They all chuckled and laughed like it was an inside joke, and then I was told to move on. Well, the next day when I showed that film, that portion of that film had been removed and was no longer there. Actually, in places we had airbrushing done, lunar pictures, lunar surfaces, as well as lunar blankety blank. Would they be the anomalies, perhaps man-made vehicles and structures that might have been on the moon from the earlier Earth civilizations? Are we talking about extraterrestrial anomalies? Because surely they wouldn't be that much more excitement being on the moon. No, I think the evidence shows with some archaeologies or some of the structures we got the indication that they were of ancient origin. Yet, what we were looking at on Apollo 14 was something that was alive because there were still lights functioning and steam. Something was going on. So you have ancient and you have current stuff. This is in Nexus Magazine, January, February 2026. Get it. It's good. Really good. And that's the reason I read you this stuff, because Nexus will bring you things that most publications won't even touch. Like Dr. Johnson there. You talk about credible. Super credible. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about is a disappearance. One disappearance, 2 people. Do I find this one strange? I find it very, very, very strange. 2 highly educated, highly experienced, athletic, healthy men disappear together. It's beyond unusual, folks. One of the men, his name was Randall Spivey, 57 years old. The other one is named Brandon Billmaier, 33. Randall was Brandon's uncle. Both men were Florida attorneys, highly successful, and both had a mutual passion for fishing. And I got to say, if I was there, they could say, oh, I had a passion for fishing as well. This is Randall Spivey. This is Brandon Billmaier on their boat, or on Spivey's boat, Randall Spivey. Both went missing December 19th of 2025, 70 miles off Marco Island, Florida. The facts on this are important to grasp. Randall lived in the 15,000 block of Intracoastal Court in Fort Myers, where he kept his boat in a canal next to his house. The boat, quite an ocean-going sports fishing vessel for sure. That's the boat. It's a 42-foot Freeman catamaran sport fishing boat. And friends, that's got 4 engines. You hardly ever see that. Most of the time it's just 3. Ultra fast, designed for offshore fishing. Now it's named, some people will say the name was Unstoppable, but you got to recognize how it was spelled. Un, U-N, stop, S-T-O-P, A space bull, B-U-L-L, unstoppable. Now, would I go out way off coast on that boat? Oh yeah, that's meant for going offshore fishing. Great boat. The experience, another very important point. Both men had tons of experience offshore fishing, most of the time together. They were best buddies. They targeted an area 70 miles off Marco Island. So this is where they left from. Then they cruised offshore 70 miles off of Naples. Marco Island is right there. Marco Island, this is where they were fishing. This is the Gulf. So they were very experienced men. I would go fishing with them. So they left in the early morning hours of December 19th, and they were due back late that afternoon. Both men, exceptional swimmers. Brandon, athlete to the max. Backgrounds. Randall Spivey, married with kids, founder of Spivey Law Firm in Fort Myers. He was a personal injury specialist. He had the highest attorney rating from Martindale and Hubel, a company that tracks this sort of thing. Peers ranked him the highest for professional excellence. Selected for Florida's super lawyers in 2013 and then 2015 through 24. He was given a Client Distinction Award, and he was voted one of the top 100 civil plaintiff attorneys for trial attorneys. He had a bachelor's degree from the University of South Florida and a JD degree from the Loyola University College of Law. And he made his life and his lifestyle in Fort Myers around fishing, boating, and the coast. If I lived there, that's exactly what I'd be doing. So that's Randall and his nephew, Brandon, best buddies. They interviewed Randall's wife, and she said that he was devoted to helping others. He was a loving husband and father. He was the type of person that helped anyone who was hurt. She said he had a passion for fishing the ocean and loved spending time with his nephew, Brandon. Now, Brandon, 33 years old, German heritage, born in Ohio and raised in Michigan. Now you say, well, how in the heck did he get to Florida? Well, he had a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in business administration and a JD degree from University of Toledo. He was an avid pickleball player, maintained a healthy lifestyle. He enjoyed lobstering and fishing. He got married in 2024, and just before he disappeared, he had just returned from a one-year anniversary with his wife to Europe. Brandon's wife said he loved helping others, and he had an absolute passion for fishing with his best buddy, Uncle Randall. Randall's wife said he became an attorney because he wanted to follow in Randall's footsteps and live the Florida lifestyle. Now, some people wonder why I lay all this out at the onset of a disappearance. I think it's super important to understand the mindsets of the people. Both these guys, super smart men. Brandon specifically, Mr. Athlete, they knew each other really well. They spent a lot of time together. They loved fishing together. You kind of get it. Now, Brandon's wife said that Brandon looked at Randall as a second father. Brandon joined the Shiner Law Firm in 2023 as a trial attorney for personal injury cases. And his wife said he truly enjoyed helping others, just like Randall. Now, on December 19th, in the early morning hours, Randall and Brandon headed out and they left Fort Myers, headed for their fishing grounds 102 miles off Marco Island. That boat would get them there quick, and it's fast. The weather the day they left was almost perfect. There was no bad weather. It was perfect. They had told their wives that they'd be back late that afternoon. And as Brandon, after he left and he knew his wife was up, that morning he texted her, said, "I love you, I'll be back tonight." The last communication she had with him. The pair had done this dozens of times in the past. Never an issue, never a problem. Now that boat, this boat was very, very highly equipped. So I've talked to you about a spot device when you go hiking. A spot device is something that you put on your backpack. Every few minutes, it'll send a transmission to the satellite, and the satellite will show up on someone who's tracking on their computer to show them where you are on that trail. Well, there's a spot device for a boat, and that was working. Keep that in the back of your mind. They also have what's called EPIRB. It's just like when I've told you before, you need a personal locator beacon. EPIRB is a personal locator beacon for the ocean. They had one on the boat. I'm telling you, the boat was super well equipped. Well, the EPIRB never went off. Nobody activated it, but the spot device was working. So December 19th at about 9 p.m., the men hadn't gotten back. Women were very nervous, and they decided that they're going to call the Coast Guard. Well, December 20th, the Coast Guard deployed multiple search resources looking for the men. Air Station Clearwater, Florida, deployed a helicopter, and using the GPS coordinates coming from the boat's spot tracker, the helicopter found the boat 70 miles offshore from Marco Island. Now, they were going 102 miles offshore to fish, and they found it 70 miles offshore, about 40 miles from their fishing ground. One theory is that they were coming back from a day of fishing when something happened. Well, 1:30 in the morning on December 20th, that Clearwater Coast Guard helicopter finds the boat. It comes into view, and this was the view of the boat from the helicopter. Couple of things. They said that when they pulled up alongside the boat was in gear. It wasn't going fast, but it was in gear. Engines running, nobody on board. And the boats were in their rod holders, but they weren't deployed, and there weren't any lures on the end of the rods. Nothing appeared to be disturbed. Nothing appeared to be wrong with the boat. Just a ghostly boat going down the Gulf with nobody on board. So the Coast Guard deploys a rescue swimmer onto the boat. Unstoppable. Swimmer gets on board, checks it, nobody's there, shuts down the engines, and anchors it in place. And then they requested a Coast Guard boat come to the scene. Well, they were already deployed, so now they can come straight to the scene and take custody of this boat. Coast Guard officials were doing a calculation where the men might be located based on the trajectory of the boat and the speed it was going. They were working off the theory that they fell off the boat. I've heard this 100 times on these cases. It's like whenever anyone's next to water, well, they had to have fallen in the water, but so many times the people aren't even found anywhere near the water. Well, midday on December 20th, the Coast Guard started a grid search of the 200 miles of water supposedly from the area they believed that the boat had cruised from while in gear. Now, you need to understand something. The Coast Guard thinks in metrics. And right away they're thinking, okay, the water temperature at the time these men disappeared was 70 degrees. So they take out their survival manual, and it says you can survive anywhere from 16 to 40 hours in 70-degree water temperatures. Okay, so that's at the maximum just under 2 days. So they had to hurry. The Coast Guard also reported something odd. They believed that there were 2 life jackets missing from that boat. They never explained why. They never confirmed the 2 jackets were on the boat, but that's what they said. So the Coast Guard decides best thing we can do is grid search it, the area where these 2 men had been. Backtrack a day, maybe 16 hours, because the men were returning, which means that they probably went missing sometime between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. on the 19th, because that's when they thought they'd be back. So the grid search by the Coast Guard included the use of a U.S. Coast Guard Fort Myers Beach helicopter, a helicopter from Clearwater, and a helicopter from Miami. Patrick Air Force Base dispatched a plane. Lee County Sheriff's dispatched boats. And they made a request to boaters and planes of citizens in southern Florida, southwest Florida, if they could contact a number, and that number would put them in a specific grid to do a search. Well, there was a huge search from Florida residences, businesses, harbors, law firms that these guys worked for. They were all over this. And the grid was coordinated by a phone number on Facebook that people were given. And the families made multiple pleas for assistance. So what do you have? You have a boat going along, perfectly clear day. No problems. No radio communication. No EPIRB activation. They weren't fishing. So were they at high speed coming home? Were they stopped in the water, maybe checked one more place to stop and fish, and something happened? I don't know. But the Coast Guard states that the search covered 6,700 square miles. Let's stop there for a second. When somebody is in the water, they look distinctly different than the water themselves when you're looking at FLIR. Water shows a uniform temperature wherever it's at. You could be flying along very high and you could see somebody in the water very well in FLIR. And that's what these people were counting on, these rescuers, especially these helicopters that all have FLIR. They're going up and down the area where these men disappeared, looking for somebody floating in the water. Now, what's interesting is that the Coast Guard compared the area of their search to the state of Connecticut. They stated that they searched 6,700 square miles in about 2 days. And the state of Connecticut was 5,543 square miles. Fort Myers Beach Coast Guard ran the search and rescue. The boat was taken back to Fort Myers Beach. And I'm going to reiterate to you, that boat was way faster than most boats. Most boats of that type have 3 engines. This one had 4. So the search started on December 20th. Remember, December 19th at 9 p.m., they reported the group missing. And December 20th at 1:30 in the morning, they found the boat, which is a fast response by the Coast Guard. Coast Guard are great people and great searchers. Well, 12:22, 6 p.m., they call off the search. The captain of the search, Captain Kerry Sargent, made this statement. After the utmost consideration and careful review of all factors involved in this case, the Coast Guard made the difficult decision to suspend its active search effort. I highly disagree. Now, the chances of survival are next to nil at that point. I get it, and that's the argument that they probably used to the family about calling off the search. But imagine if there was just a 1% chance of somebody's alive floating around out there. Imagine that. The Coast Guard gave forward a theory that one man went overboard and the other man went overboard to save him, and they didn't realize that the boat was in gear. I realize that the government thinks we're stupid, but we're not. Both men were great swimmers. Let's get that straight. If you're good at catching lobster, you're a really good swimmer. Both men were very experienced fishermen on that specific boat. Were both men wearing life preservers? I really doubt it. If they weren't wearing the life preservers, where are they? Were they ever even on the boat? I'm telling you that a lot of times you empty your boat out and you can take the life preservers out because you don't want them to get stolen or something, and sometimes you just forget to bring them back. It happens. It happened to me. They weren't actively fishing. There were no lures or bait on the hooks on the rods. The rods were put away in the rod holders. There was nothing out trolling. There was nothing there. That's important, folks. Which means that they weren't stopped fishing. So now, rule number 1 that I live by: you don't ever go in the water to save anyone unless the engines are disengaged and off. Disengaged and off. This is if someone fell in. Well, why is that, Dave? Well, you're in the ocean. Waves are pushing you every which direction. You don't want to get cut by the props. Somebody goes in right away, turn off the engines. You throw them a life preserver. Every boat has to have a life preserver you can throw. Or if you're going really fast, you turn the boat around and come back for them. So I had a ski boat for many years. You're cruising along, person skiing behind the boat, they fall. You do a U-turn, go back and get them. You may be away from them for 2 or 3 minutes, 4 minutes, I don't know. Then you pull up alongside of them and you let them get back in the boat. Or you throw them the handle of the ski rope and you ski again. Nobody's jumping overboard. And I have a fishing boat. There's no way I'm jumping into the lake to save somebody that fell in. Everybody on my boat knows how to swim, or they're wearing a life preserver. Those are the rules. Hey, come here. Come here. Don't scare the people like that. You just had a poor lady in Michigan almost have a heart attack. I don't know. So, I've done videos about the Gulf, about multiple airliners that disappeared in the Gulf, and there was no oil slick, there was no parts found, there was nothing ever found. I find that very unusual. Local reports for local consumption. Remember that line? I've used it 100 times. I still believe it in this case. There are other cases in Florida where 2 people have disappeared on one boat and the boat was later found. Yes, I find it very unusual. And trust me, the idea of jumping in to save somebody I just don't see it. And I've wrapped my head around this many times. Because everyone knows the rule. You don't jump in with the engines engaged. Ever. And the idea that 2 of them fell in or jumped in at the same time? No, because there's going to be somebody behind the wheel. Sorry. Yeah, I think it's very strange. And remember, Brandon's German, just to say. Now, kindness. I hope that you guys did something for someone in the last few days over the holidays. It was an act of kindness. I think it's super important. And there's people out there right now that need a miracle. And we've all known people that have needed a miracle. And I made a post on X about this. That while your life may be going really well, somebody out there, their life is not going well. And they're on the edge of leaving us. And I would ask you that during the holidays, you say a prayer for those people. You don't have to know them, but they are out there, and they need a prayer. And that would be a great act of kindness. So I appreciate you being here. Be kind. I appreciate you being here very much. You can watch my movies, Missing 411, Missing 411 The Hunted, Missing 411 The UFO Connection, free on Tubi. And remember, my website, missing411.com, has an online store. You can get all the DVDs, Blu-rays, books. Be safe. Paulides out.